Hello everyone, I'm Joey, and welcome back. Let me ask you something. Have you noticed that your morning coffee seems to cost more than it used to? Maybe your favorite bag of coffee at the grocery store costs several dollars more than last year? Maybe your daily latte suddenly feels like a luxury. Or maybe you've simply wondered, why is coffee getting so expensive? Is it just inflation? Are coffee companies raising prices because they can? Or is there something much bigger happening behind the scenes? The truth is, coffee has become one of the clearest examples of how weather, global trade, supply chains, and economics all come together. And the story begins thousands of miles away from your local coffee shop. Today, we'll explain exactly why coffee prices have risen so much, why they remain higher than many people expected, and why what happens on farms in Brazil or Vietnam can affect what you pay every morning. No complicated economics, no confusing charts, just the real story. Let's begin. Most people think coffee comes from a coffee shop, or maybe from a grocery store. But that's only the very end of a very long journey. Coffee starts as a crop. It has to be planted, grown, harvested, processed, shipped across oceans, roasted, packaged, transported again, and finally delivered to cafes and supermarkets. Every one of those steps costs money, if any one of them becomes more expensive. Your cup of coffee eventually becomes more expensive too. But over the last few years, several of those costs increased at the same time, and that's what made coffee prices rise so dramatically. Let's start with the world's largest coffee producer, Brazil. Brazil produces roughly 1/3 of all the coffee consumed around the world. That means when Brazil has a good harvest, global coffee supplies usually improve. But when Brazil experiences problems, the entire world feels the impact. Over the past few years, Brazil has faced repeated weather challenges, periods of drought, extreme heat, irregular rainfall, and in some regions, frost. Coffee trees are surprisingly sensitive. They need stable weather to produce healthy cherries. If temperatures become too high, or rainfall arrives at the wrong time, production can decline. Even when the trees survive, the number and quality of coffee beans may fall. Recent harvests have continued to face weather-related uncertainty, even though growers have invested more in irrigation and climate-resilient farming techniques. Now let's travel to another country, Vietnam. Vietnam is the world's largest producer of Robusta coffee. Robusta is widely used in instant coffee, espresso blends, and many commercial coffee products. Vietnam has also experienced weather problems, dry conditions, changing rainfall patterns, and higher farming costs. When Brazil and Vietnam, the two largest coffee-producing countries, both face production challenges, global supply tightens quickly, and that's exactly what happened. Reduced harvests in both countries helped push coffee prices to record levels before supplies gradually began improving. Here's something many people don't realize. Coffee trees don't work like tomato plants. If a harvest is poor this year, farmers can't simply plant more trees and fix the problem next month. Coffee trees take several years before producing significant amounts of coffee. That means today's weather problems can influence future supplies for years. This makes coffee one of the most vulnerable agricultural products when climate conditions become unpredictable. But weather isn't the whole story. Imagine you've successfully grown millions of coffee beans. Now you have to move them around the world. That means trucks, ports, cargo ships, warehouses, containers, insurance, fuel, workers. Every one of those steps became more expensive during the past few years. Even if farmers produced exactly the same amount of coffee, higher transportation costs alone could still increase the final price consumers pay. And because coffee often travels thousands of miles before reaching your kitchen, shipping costs matter much more than many people realize. Now let's talk about demand. Here's something interesting. Despite higher prices, people kept drinking coffee. In fact, coffee remains one of the most consumed beverages in the world. Millions of people begin every morning with a cup. Offices buy it. Restaurants serve it. Hotels offer it. Coffee chains continue opening new stores. Demand didn't suddenly disappear. Economists call this relatively inelastic demand. People may complain about higher prices, but many continue buying coffee anyway. When demand stays strong, while supply becomes tighter, prices usually rise. It's one of the most basic principles in economics. Another factor is inventory. Think of coffee like money in a savings account. When harvests are smaller, companies begin using stored coffee. Over time, those inventories shrink. As inventories become lower, markets become even more sensitive to any new weather problem. That's exactly why coffee prices became so volatile. Even rumors about future harvests began moving markets, because traders knew there wasn't as much coffee sitting in storage as before. There's another issue many consumers never think about. Coffee isn't sold immediately after it's harvested. Much of it is bought and sold months in advance through global commodity markets. That means prices don't depend only on today's harvest. They also depend on what traders believe will happen in the future. If investors expect smaller harvests next season, coffee prices can rise today. Markets constantly look ahead, not just at what's happening right now. Now let's bring this back to your local coffee shop. Suppose a cafe buys coffee beans that suddenly cost 30% more. At the same time, milk becomes more expensive. Electricity costs increase, employee wages rise, rent goes up, delivery costs increase. The coffee shop has a difficult decision: absorb those higher costs or increase prices. Many businesses choose a combination of both. They reduce their profit margins while also raising menu prices. That's one reason your favorite latte may now cost significantly more than it did a few years ago. And there's one more reason coffee prices remain under pressure: trade policy. The United States imports most of the coffee it consumes, and industry groups have warned that new tariffs on Brazilian coffee could raise costs further, because Brazil supplies about 1/3 of U.S. coffee imports. So, if weather, shipping, demand, inventories, and trade policy all influence coffee prices, why haven't prices fallen back to where they used to be? And if harvests begin improving, should consumers expect cheaper coffee anytime soon? So if weather, shipping, demand, inventories, and trade policy all influence coffee prices, why haven't prices fallen back to where they used to be? And if harvests begin improving, should consumers expect cheaper coffee anytime soon? Let's continue. One of the biggest misconceptions is that when coffee prices fall in global markets, consumers immediately pay less at the grocery store. Unfortunately, that's not how the supply chain works. Imagine a coffee roaster that purchased millions of pounds of coffee months ago at much higher prices. That company still has to recover those costs. Even if today's coffee becomes cheaper, it may take months before those lower prices reach supermarket shelves. The same thing happens with coffee shops. Many sign long-term supply contracts. Others purchase inventory weeks or even months in advance. Retail prices usually adjust much more slowly than commodity prices. Another important factor is roasting. Green coffee beans are only the beginning. They still need to be roasted, packaged, transported, and delivered. Roasting requires energy. Packaging requires materials. Distribution requires trucks. Workers must be paid. Warehouses must operate. Even if raw coffee becomes cheaper, those other costs may remain high. That's why your favorite bag of coffee doesn't always become less expensive when headlines say coffee prices are falling. Now let's talk about something many people overlook: quality. Not every coffee bean is the same. Premium Arabica coffee, specialty coffee, organic coffee, fair trade coffee, and mass market coffee all have different supply chains. When supplies become limited, higher quality beans often become even more expensive because demand remains strong among consumers willing to pay for premium products. That's one reason prices don't move equally across every brand. Some coffees may experience much larger increases than others. Could farmers simply grow more coffee? Eventually. Yes. Immediately. No. Coffee farming requires patience. A newly planted coffee tree usually takes several years before producing a commercially viable harvest. Farmers also face another challenge. Planting more trees today doesn't guarantee profits years from now. Future prices are uncertain. Weather remains unpredictable. Labor costs continue changing. Fertilizer prices fluctuate. Every investment carries risk. That's why increasing global coffee production is much slower than many people imagine. Climate is another long-term concern. Scientists and agricultural experts have warned that rising temperatures and more frequent extreme weather events could make coffee production more challenging in some traditional growing regions. Some farms are investing in irrigation. Others are planting more resilient coffee varieties. Some producers are moving to higher elevations where temperatures remain more suitable. The coffee industry is adapting, but adaptation takes time, and time costs money. Now let's return to something we mentioned earlier: demand. Despite higher prices, people around the world continue drinking coffee every day. For many, coffee isn't just another beverage. It's part of a daily routine, a morning habit, a workplace tradition, a social activity. Because demand remains relatively strong, producers don't face the same pressure to dramatically reduce prices as they might with products people can easily stop buying. That's another reason coffee prices often remain elevated longer than consumers expect. Let's also remember that coffee is traded globally. A drought in Brazil, heavy rains in Vietnam, shipping delays in one region, or changes in international trade policy can influence prices paid by consumers thousands of miles away. This is one of the clearest examples of globalization in everyday life. You may never visit a coffee farm, yet events happening there can affect what you spend every morning. So, what lessons can we learn from all of this? First, the price of coffee isn't determined by a single company. It's influenced by weather, agriculture, transportation, energy, labor, currency movements, global demand, and international trade. Second, higher prices don't always mean someone is simply charging more. Often, businesses throughout the supply chain are facing higher costs themselves. Third, commodity prices and retail prices are not the same thing. Even if coffee becomes cheaper on international markets, consumers may need to wait before seeing lower prices in stores. Finally, markets are always adjusting. When prices rise, farmers invest more. Companies look for efficiencies. New supplies eventually reach the market. Over time, those adjustments can help stabilize prices, but the process is rarely quick. The story of coffee is really a story about how connected the modern economy has become. A weather event in Brazil, a shipping delay in the Atlantic, a drought in Vietnam, or a change in trade policy can all influence the price of a cup of coffee in New York, Chicago, London, or Tokyo. That's the reality of today's global economy. Everything is connected. So, why is coffee so expensive? Not because of one single reason. It's the result of multiple economic forces working together. Weather reduced production in key growing regions. Transportation became more expensive. Energy costs increased. Global demand remained strong. Inventories tightened. Trade uncertainty added new pressure. And because coffee takes years to produce, the market couldn't respond overnight. The next time you buy a cup of coffee, you'll know you're paying for much more than roasted beans. You're paying for agriculture, global logistics, international trade, climate, economics, and one of the most complex supply chains in the world. If you enjoyed this explanation and want more simple, fact-based videos about economics, inflation, personal finance, and the hidden stories behind everyday prices, be sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.